Hello and welcome to From Mrs. to Me, a podcast where you'll be inspired by courageous stories of strength and resilience told by women just like you who have been through the upheaval of divorce. This is their journey from Mrs. to Me, finding their true identity and creating a bold, beautiful life. I'm Crissy Freeman and I'm your host, a certified life coach and divorced mother of two. Join me each week as we explore real stories of divorce and what it takes to transform and live in alignment with the real you. Hello, and welcome to another episode of From Mrs. to Me. I'm Crissy Freeman, divorce empowerment coach and your host. My next guest will inspire you as she shares her story of transformation and how yoga changed the trajectory of her life and ultimately her decision to leave her marriage. Growing up on the coast of Maine, she developed a love of the outdoors, mountains, forests, and the oceans early on. Yoga was a theme through a lot of her childhood. It was during her 200-hour yoga training in 2012 that she began to acknowledge that her marriage wasn't healthy. This led to her divorce in 2015 when her twin boys were 6 years old. Kalyani's divorce became an opportunity to shift her focus, and after being a stay-at-home mom for 6 years, she made a pivot in her career, and instead of returning to the medical field, she began pursuing her love of yoga and healing others. She is now a Yoga Alliance 500-hour Hatha yoga instructor, licensed massage therapist, and Ayurvedic health counselor. I'm so happy she's agreed to join us and share her inspiring story of transformation. Welcome, Kalyani, to the show.
Thank you, Crissy, so much for inviting me to be a part of your podcast.
Yes, I'm so excited to talk about your transformation. And as we talk about what I call the From Mrs. to Me transformation, you mentioned in your bio that you started to realize you were in an unhealthy marriage when you were pursuing your yoga training. Can you walk us through how this realization came to be?
Sure. I should probably say that I had been married for, I'm trying to think, around 7 years. Was that right? Something like that. And actually, it was longer than that because it was 2012 when it came to that realization. So about 9 years, actually. And I think that as women, we can get caught up in being wife and then mother, and we kind of forget like who we are, which is part of that journey, right? So I wasn't aware that that had happened until, because I loved being a mom and I loved being a wife, until I started this journey of my 200-hour yoga teacher training. And I had been doing yoga and I had taken a health empowerment class. A few years prior to that had opened my eyes to the world of Ayurveda, which you mentioned as well. So that was also an aspect of all of this. So I was moving in this direction. And then as part of yoga teacher training, we're required to do yoga every day, meditation every day for, I think it was about 9 months. And during that process, the things that we have kind of stuffed away and kind of swept under the carpet, they start to become exposed, right? Because we are opening our body, we're moving our body every day. I now know that emotions are energy and they sit in the cells of our being, that the emotions that we haven't taken time to process or we don't know how to process for whatever reason, it's not a bad thing at all. It just is. They're sitting in us. And so when you start moving the body like I had to every single day for this yoga teacher training, those things that I had stuffed away were starting to stir up. And quite honestly, I didn't even know at first what was happening. I didn't even know that this was leading me to recognize that my divorce was unhealthy. I just knew I felt uncomfortable. And so that discomfort, we learn tools through yoga and meditation, how to sit with that discomfort, right? And I'm so grateful that I was in this world. And I feel like nothing ever is by chance. Everything happens as it is meant. So I was right where I needed to be, right? So through that process, it was really, I graduated, ironically, on my 40th birthday from this yoga teacher training. Yeah. So a lot of you're already reflecting on, I'm 40 years old. Where am I in my life? So that's also being stirred up. And so it's over the next couple months where the realization of I'm sitting back and I'm observing myself and I'm realizing that the marriage that I'm in is not healthy. We were very distant. We weren't connected. There were some other things happening too. And I had just kind of used my children as an excuse to just stay focused on that. And I didn't need to deal with my own things. So that was another big piece of it because they were younger and they did need me. But then they're starting preschool and I'm starting to have some free time during my day. And now I have time to sit with all of this. So I remember we had gone to Florida like we did every year for a couple of months. And while I was in Florida, it would have been in like February, March. I remember waking up one morning and saying, I can't stay in this marriage. Just like this light bulb. So those uncomfortable feelings that had been stirred up, 6 months before, 8 months before, were rising to the surface. And at the same time, I thought, how in the world can I leave? Like that thought was overwhelming. I had become a stay-at-home mom and I'd become dependent on my husband. And how could I do this? And how could I tear my family apart? And the guilt of like, my children are young. How do I do this to them?
Which is so common. So, I just want to add, so many women go through that.
Yeah. And I feel like as I share my story, I also want to put out there that this is not just my story. This is so many women's story. So it's another reason I do like to share, because I feel like we need to know that we're not alone, that we're, these are normal parts of the whole transition, is that feeling that guilt and do I stay? Do I not stay? Do I stay for the kids? Do I leave for my own sanity? All of the things. And so when we came home from Florida, we ended up staying in separate bedrooms. And I kept kind of waiting. I was a little younger than him too. And I kept waiting for him to come to me. And I wouldn't have done this now. I'm a different woman now. But back then I was waiting for him to come to me and say, hey, it's not okay that my wife isn't sleeping in the same room with me. What can we do to fix this? And he never did. And I had to reach a point, and I think at that point, it was like in May or June, where I sat down with him and said, this is not okay. I think we need counseling. And he said, you're right. And I just said, this is not marriage to me. And he said, you're right. I think you should go to counseling.
But he didn't want to go. Yeah.
So I decided within myself that I needed to talk to somebody, because I was starting to feel like, what is real? What is made up? Am I creating a story? Am I not? And I had a lot of confusion. And I had previous events in my life that taught me not to trust my own intuition. So this story over the next several years is really about me reconnecting with that and learning to trust my own intuition. But I wasn't there yet. So I did go to a counselor who right away saw that there was some controlling behaviors and some unhealthy behaviors. And she validated me, actually, which felt great.
Which sometimes we need that.
Yeah, because I wasn't in trust of that intuition yet. And we worked together to help me leave, because it really was what I needed to do. I felt as if I was going to stay, that I was really going to lose who I am. I felt that in my core, that I was going to fade away to nothing. I don't know how else to describe it. And I also had this understanding that, yeah, my boys were young, that I didn't want them growing up thinking that this was their example of marriage, that this was okay. So that was the other impetus, I think, for me to take those steps.
Yeah. And I love that you said that, because I just want to touch on a couple things real quick. One is that you referenced that it was almost like you were at first using your kids as an excuse to stay. And I think so many of us do that, myself included, where it's like, oh no, my kids aren't going to be okay if I leave. But then what you just said a second ago is so true, which is really, we're doing the opposite when we do that. We are setting this example that it's okay to be unhappy in a situation, just to make sure that everybody else is okay. Versus, what about you? What about us? Don't we want to set the example for them that if they're ever in a situation like that, that they should be looking out for themselves and making the decision that's right for them? So how empowering. And I just wanted to touch on that because I think it's something that so many women out there need to hear is our kids want us to be happy.
Mm-hmm.
They really do. They love us and they want us to be happy just like we want that for them. And so we're not doing them any good by staying in a situation that is not good for us. So thank you for sharing that.
Of course.
And you touched on, this whole identity piece, which is a lot of the work that I do, which is around this, you become this wife. I mean, there's so many times in our lives, right, when we put on these different costumes to go out into the world. And whether it's our career or a mom or a wife, we get stuck in this identity. And instead of really going in and doing that inner work of who am I? What is my authentic truth? And how do I want to sort of show that out to the world and those that I love, without fear of what others might think about me? And so as I think about that whole piece around leaving a marriage and leaving behind sort of that identity as a wife, and you're now a single mom, can you walk us through sort of what I refer to as that healing path of rediscovery? How did you go about sort of getting back on that path of who am I, and how did you rediscover you through that journey?
Sure. A part of the counseling that I was in, I remember, so this was, many years ago at this point. I would have been in counseling probably in 2013. So, it was 2013 that I started. And there was a really profound thing that my counselor said to me. And she said, I urge you not to date for a while because you don't really know who you are yet. And I was still young enough and naive enough to be like, what do you mean? I know who I am. I have
right.
What are you talking about? And in hindsight, when I look back, I was like, oh, you just did not know what you didn't know. And
right.
I did date some, and I learned a lot from each of those interactions too. However, I wish I had given myself some more space. Although I always feel like, again, everything occurs as it is meant to. And there was the lessons and things I took away from that as well. However, I really value time and space between relationships at this point in time, to take that time to reflect and to heal and to regroup and reconnect with yourself, because we can get lost in relationship. And it's something that I feel like I finally have found through this journey, the ability to be in relationship and not lose myself anymore, and not give in to what I think that person wants or needs or whatever. And it can still be true to myself. And that's really what I would want from my own partner. So that authenticity. So I think that question was really valid. It stuck with me that counselor said to me, it wasn't a question, but that comment about you don't really know who you are yet. And it was many things that brought me to where I am now. I mean, years. And I feel like as I was sitting here and listening to you a minute ago, I was like, it's so profound to me that you are doing this, because I wish I had had something like this during that time. Instead, I had pieces, like the universe put people in my life that guided me along the way. But to have something like this as this resource would have been so powerful during that time. Instead, I had just kind of feeling like I had stepped back, maybe because of my yoga and Ayurveda, and I was teaching yoga at the time. I had a yoga studio in Ellsworth, Maine, and sitting back with, I had this opportunity to almost recreate whatever I wanted to be. There was even a point where my ex-husband had moved to Florida and wasn't a big part of our life. And I thought, wow, I could really almost go anywhere in the world if I wanted to. I could move the boys and I to Italy, a place I loved, if I wanted to. So what do I want my future to look like? And in that process, I think I started delving into who am I? Because like, what is it that I want to create for my future and my boys' future too? And again, the universe kept bringing people into my life, and I happened to be receiving massage from a woman that was older than me. That there was 3 older women; they were all friends that kind of came into my life during this period of time, and I called them my wise counsel, and I learned so many seeds of wisdom from them. Yeah, so I'm so grateful this group of women. And the ironic thing is, they've kind of phased out of my life now. It's like I needed them during that time, and then now I no longer need them in that way. And they were great guidance during that time. One of them actually took that health empowerment class with me years ago that led me to Ayurveda. And then there was my yoga teacher, Sally Clinton, actually was taking a course to become a life, like a counselor. Forget the phrase for it right now. But basically similar to what you're doing, but to doing it for your life. A life coach, basically.
Like a life coach. Yeah. Okay.
That's the phrase I was looking for. So in this process, as you go through divorce, finances are an issue. And I'm going to my yoga classes because they're like breathing air for me. And she comes up to me and says she's in this training and she wanted me to join her as one of her practice clients, and it was a reduced rate. And even then I was like, Sally, I don't think I can afford that. And she said, no, you can just make payments and it'll be fine. I really want you to do this. And it was 10 sessions with her. And so during that process, I looked at, she would take me in and we would always start our interactions with the centering. So dropping into breath, feet on the ground, and breathing, and just dropping into myself, that inside. And from there, the sessions were conducted. And these led me to exploring what is it that I really wanted. And as we would talk, we talked about like what careers felt good to me. Were careers that I could do and still be the mom that I wanted to be, because I loved being a mom. So I didn't want to enter it back into the medical field for one reason, because I couldn't be the mom I wanted to be. I'm really limited to the hours I can work. And I still wasn't ready to like have other people take care of my kids a whole lot. So, and I used to say I didn't have children for other people to raise, which is just my choice. That's my choice. That's not for every woman, but that was my choice. So we explored options, and massage therapy was one of them. And it felt right. And years before I'd thought about it, and I thought, no, there's no way I would ever want to do that. But teaching yoga, especially up in that area, isn't something that I could make a living on. It afforded me being able to work around my children's schedule, which was great. And then I picked up some waitressing and things to make ends meet. So that was kind of the unfolding in the direction of discovering that felt good to me. And then I applied to a massage school that could fit my schedule. It was a weekend format so that I could still work during the week, and then my mom could help watch the boys while I went to school on the weekend. And at the last minute, I had another program come in that was more fitted for me, another massage therapy school. Because part of massage therapy school is doing anatomy and physiology, and I'd already had years and years of that. So I didn't need that portion. So this program that came in was tailored more for people who had some medical background. So we didn't need to cover that part. That was kind of done on your own, or, already had that knowledge for passing the board exam. And it fit even better into my schedule. It really was like, I think every other weekend. I forget how long it took. It was probably close to a year. And I just remember driving. This is the significant part, though. I just remember driving home after the very first day. And I made this amazing new friend who is another single mom who is in my life to this day. And so there was that gift that was given during that experience. And then I'm driving home and I'm literally in tears going, oh my word, I can do this profession, be the mom that I want to be, and provide for my children and I the way I need to. And it was just this overwhelming joy inside of me. And I knew that was absolutely the path that I needed to be on. And I'm so grateful for that. and that awareness and kind of the nudges that were along the way. I think one of the things that I want to share is that I feel like there's little subtle nudges along the way that sometimes we overlook or we kind of like brush away. And if we can just be step back again into ourselves and just be realized, no, nothing again is by chance. And so all these little details are there. And sometimes we miss them. And that's okay because they'll show up again in another way. However, it's so beneficial to kind of step back into yourself and start to trust this unfolding and this path that when we're walking or we're doing our work and we're not trying to be pulled out over here and be this perfect mom or this perfect whatever, anything, we drop back into ourselves and we're just in this flow. We are gently guided.
Yes. I call that the surrender.
Yes.
I love that you brought that up because to me, that is the surrender to what is, right?
Yes.
It's like so many beautiful gifts are coming to us every day. But I know myself, when I first got divorced, there was too much going on in my head for me to even see the beautiful things that were coming towards me and leading me in a particular direction, because I wasn't doing that surrender, which is there is nothing wrong in this moment. As I stand here, feet grounded, there's absolutely nothing wrong. And so getting yourself present and really letting that mind chatter go and just surrendering. And sometimes it's uncomfortable, the things we have to surrender to, right? It's the scary, it's like me doing this podcast. It's, going into that discomfort, the discomfort of it all and feeling it, but then reaping the beautiful rewards, which is what you did, which is, you know what, I'm going to find something that supports me and how I want to raise my children. And scary, the financial insecurity that goes along with that can be paralyzing. And so the fact that you really leaned into that and found it is amazing, because that doesn't happen to a lot of people early on after divorce. So you were already like halfway there because you were doing this yoga training before you even got divorced, which is amazing. And there's so many things I want to ask you, because there's so many things about your story that are just incredible. But one of the things, the first thing you said was you were talking about your support. And, I talk a lot about that on here, about sort of your village. Who are those people that come into your life and they support you no matter what choices you make, no matter where your life is headed. And especially as you make that transition to becoming who you really are at your core. And so I wanted to just ask you a little bit, just to go a little bit more into that, because I think a lot of women hide. There's shame, there's guilt, and they don't really put themselves out there. So how did you sort of open yourself up to allowing others to come in to support you on this journey?
Crissy, that is such a good question. And to be honest, I really struggled with it, and I still struggle with it. There's so much shame in divorcing. And I was actually married to somebody that was really well known in our area where we lived and very well loved. And so I literally became like the woman with the scarlet letter. And there were stories told, there are friendships lost. I lost my father actually to this divorce. He sided with my ex. So there was a lot of me having to just stand in my knowing deep inside of me that I had to go forward anyway. And I think that I am maybe even just now starting to open myself to sharing more of these parts of the story. And again, I feel like you never know what somebody else is going through. And I remember listening to a podcast by Brené Brown where she was talking about like vulnerability, and that's how we connect with each other. And so I think that really stuck with me. That was ironic too, because in the beginning of my separation and divorce, I became friends with someone who introduced me to that podcast, because I had actually said, oh, vulnerability is a weakness. I can't be vulnerable. And so that was, again, part of my transformation. And they were like, no, you need to listen to this podcast. And I was like, what? So I listened to it, or TED Talk, I think it is. And it's so powerful. If anybody listening to this has not watched that that TED Talk by Brené Brown.
It's incredible. It's one of my favorites. Yeah.
So I think that was that. And that was another person who told me about that TED Talk that came into my life and crossed paths. That I had a moment, they were a male, and I hadn't had really healthy energy coming from male figures in my life. And they were the opposite of everything I had experienced. In fact, they had rented a room next door to my yoga studio, and I had to cross paths with this person. And I didn't want to, because they were male. And was forced to pass them on the stairs one day. And I literally, they were so kind to me, broke down in tears. This person is one of my best friends to this day now. And so he was the one who said, you need to watch this podcast. And then he also gave me a fabulous book to read. The Untethered Soul is another one.
Yes. Love that book.
You said, this is required divorce reading. And so this was a moment there where I could have kept my head down and walked up the stairs and not even spoken to this person. But something inside of me, I can't even tell you what, was like, it's okay to say hi and introduce yourself, because you're right next door to each other in this building. And we developed, today we are still best friends. He lives on the West Coast, but we keep in touch frequently and talk a lot about these things in the dating world and all of the growth that we've done since those days. But he was a catalyst for me being able to open myself, I think, more. And then that wise counsel that I spoke of, I had a massage scheduled one day with one woman, and it was she and her partner were part of this wise counsel. And I showed up for the appointment, and my massage therapist wasn't there. And I never make mistakes like that. Like, I'm so type A. And I was like, what? And her partner was there, and she said, oh no, Martha's in California right now. She would never have booked you for an appointment right now. And I'm like, how did I make this mistake? And so I'm like, okay. And I'm devastated, because I was really looking forward to the massage, and I'm in this vulnerable place of where I'm leaving my ex. And this was at the point where I hadn't told anybody yet. It was still within me, and I hadn't shared it yet. And so this person, Laura, says to me, she sensed there was something off, and like I was reluctant to leave. And she said, well, I think your appointment maybe was with me. And she's like, come on in and sit down. And she made me tea, and she could tell something was going on, but she didn't directly pull it out of me right away. She let me just sit. And then I don't remember how it exactly unfolded, but I felt so safe and held and seen with Laura. Anybody who knows her, that's what she does. And I ended up telling her, we were walking around. They had a beautiful saltwater farm at that time. And she had taken me outside to walk around at that point. And I ended up telling her, I need to leave my husband. And she just held me, and she said, I know. And I was like, you know? How do you know? And she was like, well, I've met him, and yeah, he's closed and shut down, and you're not. You're open and vibrant and alive. And I was like, what? I felt so seen and so held. And she had me go read something. I can't remember exactly what it was, but and sit down by the water and just be alone by myself for a little bit. And it felt so good to have shared this thing that was inside of me and verbalize it for the first time. She was the first person I told. So I feel like it was, and then it was my friend Rob that I met like probably a few months later that was like, watch the show on vulnerability. And I think that like gave me permission in a way to listen to my intuition about who it's safe. That's another key to this. Like, we can't just share with just anybody, right? And we have to watch the level that we share. That's a big lesson I took through a lot of this too. But I think it took me to the opposite direction where I didn't share with people I maybe could have or should have. But it's okay. That's all, it's all part of it. And I don't really feel like there's anything we ever do wrong along the path. It's just how we grow and learn. So I think those are two big moments to me where I feel like I had the opportunity to connect and share. And then again, like I had mentioned, my yoga teacher that offered the life coaching and being able to accept her generosity and open up to her, who had seen me through, like my marriage and getting pregnant and, now leaving. So
yeah. And so it's so beautiful because I think one of the things I heard you say before that too is that there are friendships that also, not all friendships are meant to follow you through every phase of your life. They're there for a moment in time. And I wouldn't change any of it. Just like I wouldn't change my marriage to my former spouse because it didn't give me my beautiful children. It wouldn't have given me if I didn't have him in my life. And, we were different. And there was a reason why we weren't meant to be together. And same thing with some friends in my life. And, there's a lot of transition that happens and friendships come and go. And I think sometimes that's such a gift because it leads us to something else that is what we need for that next chapter in our life. And so that's exactly what happened with you. And how beautiful. And I love your story about meeting that first male friend because I had that same experience. I was afraid to encounter any man and have like any relationship whatsoever or conversation. And, but once I started opening up to that, so many beautiful relationships opened up. And so thank you for sharing that because I think a lot of us struggle with that too. But I do want to transition for a second to talk about you as a mom, because I think, anyone who's a mom out there, we lead with that. We lead with, the care for our babies. And even though sometimes they are older, they're still our babies at the end of the day. And lots of times our priority. But I want to talk about that change to the family unit, because one of the things after divorce that I hear a lot from women is, how do people navigate like new traditions, doing things without, your former spouse? And what does that look like? Now it's just you and them. And so I would love to hear from you around, how did you do that? How did you create new traditions? How did you navigate that new landscape of, this new family unit?
Wow, that's really a great question. And I love thinking about this because, again, I loved being a mother. I still love being a mother really, to me, is the greatest thing I have done. And I feel so inspired by my children. I feel like having them in my life is what allowed me to leave. It's allowed me to push forward, to like make the changes that I've needed to change. And just like you said, I don't regret my marriage to my ex. It was very unhealthy. It continued to be very unhealthy up until last year when he passed. And so I think for me, my story is maybe not exactly the same as just everybody else's, because I didn't really co-parent a whole lot. He was in Florida for a short portion of our lives. So I think for me, it was, I feel like I love tradition. And so there were certain traditions that I wanted to keep alive, but they became just ours. And my children and I became very close. I think this didn't have anything to do with being married or not married. I just had this understanding that I wanted to develop a really open communication between my boys and I, with my idea of that when they were teenagers, that they would still be open with me and still communicative instead of shutting down. I do think that's a shift for my generation. I'm in my early 50s, and I think that we were raised where we really didn't connect a whole lot during our teen years necessarily with our parents. We're kind of like left to ourselves, and we're off like doing our own thing. And that shifted a lot. The world's changed a lot. And I think parents are more connecting with their children as teens. And I just knew even when they were younger that I wanted that. So I tried to include them in on like, well, what do you feel like doing? And I learned from really young, when you have twins, if you have multiple children, anything, you just learn not to give them multiple choices. It's this or this, right? So this is what I'm thinking, or we could do this. Or I'm open to hearing what your thoughts are as well. So I kind of try to have dialogue with them because they have emotions too that they're trying to process. And especially when they're younger, they may not know exactly how to express that. And so I think for me, I just really stuck with traditions. But I am going to be honest here and say I loved Christmas with my boys, but for many years, I had to fake it at Christmas. I did not feel it. I could not tap into that joy of Christmas. And it really, for me, I would have glimpses of it here and there. But I still, I would cook a great meal, and we had our tradition of stockings in the morning, and then we would slowly open presents throughout the day. And I would have usually that holiday with my mother too. And there were times when I remember doing the Friendsgiving, where you do just friends for Thanksgiving. And that felt really nice to explore that version of it with my children, and they had children, and, the kids could all play together. There is something that I created during that time that was really powerful, because I wasn't living where I am now in Southern Maine. I was halfway up the coast of Maine. It can feel very isolating in the wintertime, especially. There's not a lot to do. We don't live in communities there. It's people are pretty spaced out. But we had connections through their school, especially their Montessori school when they were younger that they had gone in. Those friendships had stayed. And so I started doing, through the winter months, once a month, having people over to my house. And then we would sometimes go to somebody else's house, where we would do either a brunch, on a Sunday morning brunch, or an evening where we would it was potluck. So I would do the base of things, and we would sometimes have a theme like Mexican or whatever. And then everybody else would bring stuff too, and all their kids would come. I had a playroom. The kids could be in the playroom, and the adults could have adult time. And that felt really, that sense of community. But it became also one of our ways of navigating holidays and all of that as well. So I think it was for me about creating my own sense of community. And then from that, it kind of developed into, this is how we're going to navigate holidays. It gave me that foundation that we're changing things up. They're going to be different, and then that's okay.
Yes. I love that. And, it's funny. I had someone on recently, and we talked about this same subject, and I think we're raised, and I don't know if it's our generation or what, but that the holidays in the US are a certain way. You spend them with family around a table. Some people don't get along, but you have to do it because that's what you do. And there's no question around it. And, one of the things that she said was she started to question after divorce, why? Why do I go to these things that I don't enjoy and put my children through that? And so what you did is exactly that, is while you didn't, that you struggled in the beginning, as did I, with defining what that looked like for you and the boys, you were able to come to this place of creating your own community in how you wanted to celebrate. And it doesn't have to look like everybody else's. And that, I think, is, for so many people, it's almost like we have to have permission to do things the way that we want to do them. And, I remember must have been the first year after I got divorced, I decided that I was taking my kids to see the Grand Canyon, because we had all talked about it. And it was it was something we wanted to do. And I was like, oh, wow, I'm going to do this on my own with my kids. Now, mind you, they were teenagers. We did it on Christmas. So we left Christmas Day, and I said, we're not doing presents. We're not doing any of that. We're getting on a plane, and we're going to Arizona to the Grand Canyon. And it was the best trip I have ever had in my life and ever had with them. And I am so glad that we did it. There were many crazy fumbles, but it's so beautiful. And we still laugh about it to this day. So, because it was an adventure. But anyway, I love what you shared. I love that you've been able to create this beautiful life for you and your boys. And one other thing I did want to ask you is about boundaries, because it's one of those things that I think is really important for us to set for ourselves as women, as single moms, is those boundaries. And boundaries, now for you, it wasn't necessarily around co-parenting. You had some other boundaries you had to set, I think, with your former spouse. But how did you set boundaries to sort of continue to prioritize you and your boys and what's important to you? And how have you sort of maintained that today?
That is such a journey, because I was not good at that in the beginning. Oh my gosh. I was thinking about your trip you just said, though, too. I'm going to go backwards just for a moment, because I feel like what you did, first of all, was so empowering. And I want to acknowledge that, to take a trip without your spouse and your kids. And I remember doing a similar thing. It wasn't for Christmas, but we were watching the Winter of the Dolphin movies, and I wanted to take them to see Winter. And I literally sold my engagement ring to make the trip happen, because I was like, there's a way. If you want to make something happen, you can find a way. And I drove, and I'd driven that route to Florida many times. But I remember my ex-husband was very particular about the route we would take. We were always towing a travel trailer at the time too. And I remember this time I was like, I'll just follow the same route we always took, because like whatever he planned it out, it must have been good for a reason. And then I started looking at the map, and I was like, I'm going to go this way. I'm going to take this way.
Oh, yes.
This is what happens when I do this. And I remember driving and literally within myself being, oh my word, he would not approve of this right now. I could hear his voice, and like the transition of like that whole journey of I'm taking my kids on a trip by myself, and I'm doing it differently than I would have done it with him. And hearing the, like, in the background, I just knew that he wouldn't approve.
Yes. So empowering, right?
So I just wanted to share that little piece. And again, that's partly part of the boundaries too, of like acknowledging that, oh, it's okay for me to do this. And there's nothing wrong. Even if I mess up, I ended up stuck in traffic outside DC because I went in a little too close to DC, and that was lesson learned. But that's okay. No harm was done.
Yeah.
And, and just the journey of boundaries, though, I think I feel like that wasn't just with the divorce. That was with like even, parents setting boundaries, me setting boundaries with my parents, or, friendships. And this is a conversation I feel like comes up a lot with my clients, even on the table, about setting boundaries. Because I think especially as women, and women that are caregivers too, like we have such shame and guilt around putting ourselves first. And that is something that I know I've struggled with. I feel like I have expunged whatever that was at this moment in my time, in my life. And I feel like there's a fine line though. Like the pendulum can swing so far that we set so many boundaries that we're almost like protecting ourselves too much. Right. And we're not allowing for that.
You're right.
Vulnerability and those moments that this person's stepping in, and it's okay to allow this, even though I might not normally, I would have this strict boundary around this. Can we let go? Can we be in that flow? Can we surrender? Right. But boundaries are so important for our mental health, I think, really. And establishing, this is part of it, that going back to doing that work and being still with yourself and discovering who you really are. Because until you know who you are, you can't set those boundaries. They're going to be all over the place. So it's a lot of work. And I feel like that's been years of trying to figure that out. And I think for me, it's trial and error with what feels right. And like, I have to say that lately, and I got a little too, this is part of like setting too strict of a boundary. My children are now 16 and they're sophomores. And I have had this real sense and awareness around the fact that I have 2 more years with them before I send them off into the world. And I'm raising them to do that. They're ready. Like they can do all the things on their own that they need to do. We're getting through the driving thing right now, but they're well on their way to be able to exist on their own as we want them to. However, I am getting more and more protective of my time with them as I feel that it's fleeting. So I'm less willing to maybe allow things in, like even this podcast. Like setting stricter boundaries around, I won't look at my emails after 5 o'clock or on the weekends anymore, because those are my time with my children. I won't see clients anymore after 5. I used to like take clients all the time, anytime that worked better for people, but I was burning myself out and I was getting resentful. So I think those are some of the things to look for. And I think resentment is a big thing that crops up when we're not setting a boundary that we need to be setting.
Oh, totally.
Yeah, it's a big one. And so I think that, again, it's coming back to my children are almost my big teachers in this of like, okay, it's okay to set these boundaries. I don't even need the excuse of them to do it, right? It just feels right for me not to look at my email after 5 o'clock. And that's okay.
Yeah.
But being with that, like there's times and it's okay to like let that go.
Yeah. And I think they're ever changing, to your point, based upon, I mean, when our kids are little, it's very different than, when they're teenagers, and what we prioritize and what's important to us changes. But it's hard. It is. I just want to recognize that for everybody out there. Like, it is hard to set boundaries and to stick to them. Like, we can write them down a million times. We can say, I'm not going to do that. I'm not going to take that phone call again. I'm not going to, send text messages to people after this time. It's hard.
And then we do it, and then we start down that slippery slope of like, okay, we let the boundary completely go. And then we're beating ourselves up. Like, how did I get here?
Yes. And that it's dangerous. And so it's okay to restart. I want to tell people that like, it's okay to restart. It's okay to fall off and to have to restart. And totally reassess. I mean, and that we have to reassess. It's like, let me check back in with me. Let me see if this is still in alignment with what I need. And then I'll go back out and reset the boundary, restate it, reset it, and stick to it for as long as I can. So, that's just a reality of life sometimes.
It's validating when we see back the results of setting those boundaries and we start to feel better. I didn't want to interrupt you, but I feel like another boundary for me is learning that it's okay to take a day for my self-care and not have guilt around that. In order to function as the mom that I want to be and as the practitioner that I want to be, I can't give all to my clients or my, children or anybody in my life if I'm not taking care of me. And I keep coming back to that, and slowly that shame or guilt over like doing this. And I feel it like, and I start like, somebody will ask, well, what's your day look like? And I'll be like, oh, well, I'm going to go work out this morning and then I have a massage. And I start to feel like, oh my word, they're going to think that I'm not working enough, or I'm this or I'm that. And instead of being like, no, this is my boundary that I've set for myself. This is my self-care day. And it's okay to have that. And the other thing that I've noticed with boundaries is when we set boundaries, we are setting an example to other people that it's okay for them to also set boundaries.
Yes. Because there's always this chatter in our mind of, I'm not good enough. Oh my gosh, someone's going to think this about me. Oh, but if we start all living that way, right? And we all set up our boundaries and we're clear about them, it gives everyone else permission to say, okay, I can do this. And why am I judging myself for giving me what I need?
Exactly.
There shouldn't be a judgment there. So yeah, thank you for sharing that, because I think that's so helpful for other women out there to hear. And so one final question I want to ask you before we close out is, I talk a lot about authenticity and what does that really mean to you to be authentic and real and stand in your truth. And so can you tell me, how do you define authenticity for you in your life?
Yeah, I love this so much. I love this for so many reasons, because I actually consciously try to live an authentic life. So I feel like for me, and I don't know how to exactly put this out there, but I feel like I was almost like born with that awareness, and I got pulled away from it because of different, and I think maybe we're all born with that awareness, and I got pulled away from it because of, upbringing or stories that I was told and believed, or whatever reason I got pulled away from that. And so authenticity for me really feels that I am living in alignment with my truth of who I really am. And that can change. It doesn't mean that that's a steadfast thing for my entire life. And I can feel in my being when I'm not being authentic. I can feel like that something doesn't feel right, or this wording didn't feel right, and I want to almost take it back, or there's an offness. I don't know how else to explain it when I am not living my authentic self. I feel less me, right? I'm just not being true to who I am. And that to me is authenticity. And I love it when I see it in others. I find it incredibly inspiring. It makes me sad when I feel like I can sense or see somebody who is trying to be something because they think that's what they're supposed to be. And I just want to say,
yes,
please be you, please be you. The world needs us to be us, not somebody else.
Totally. And I've had to learn to have, now that I have found a way to live my life in an authentic way, I have to have empathy for others because I know what it's like to not do that. I know what it's like to feel so uncomfortable in your own skin. And it's like, why am I putting this show on for people? This feels gross. But yet it's when you're not in alignment with who you really are, or maybe you don't even know who you really are at that point in time. Yeah. And so instead, it's so external facing of what do they want? What do they want? Let me give that to them. And so I have to have empathy for those people too, right? Because it's like, okay, they're not there yet.
And that's okay.
And that's okay. But I have to continue to do my work so I can show up authentically. So I love what you shared.
It really taps into something that I think about often about our inner lights. We all have an inner light, and we dim that light sometimes because we don't want to make somebody feel uncomfortable, or whatever reasons we're dimming it. We don't think we're worthy of letting our bright light shine. And what we know is that when we allow our light to shine, it allows that next person's light to also shine. It's the giving of permission, and it's just an ongoing thing, and it just is exponential when we live an authentic life, and we then give permission for everybody else around us to also live in that manner.
Yes, thank you. And what a beautiful place to end today. I've so enjoyed this conversation. And so tell me, Kalyani, if someone wants to get in touch with you, do work with you, whether that's massage, yoga, Ayurveda, how can they get in touch with you?
There's so many ways you can get in touch with me. You've already heard me say I don't answer emails after 5 or 10. I make exceptions. It depends on the situation. I think one of the best ways, I have a website, and I just changed the address to be a little bit easier to find. My business is called Idylwild, and I realize that's a word that's a little difficult to remember or spell. When I was researching the name for my company, I found a definition that said a utopian place in the forest. And I wanted my business to feel organic. And so that was why I ended up choosing that. So my website is idylwildme.com. So IDYLWILD, ME for May.com. So you can find me there, and all my contact information is on there, the email, my phone number, texting is great. So I think that's probably the easiest way to
Okay. Perfect. And I will put that in the show notes too. So for those of you listening, you can also find it in the show notes wherever you're listening. And so thank you so much for joining us. This has been a great conversation. And for those of you who are interested in joining the From Mrs. to Me community, you can find us on Facebook at From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce, where you can join our community And you can listen into or join our virtual connection calls once a month, as well as have access to additional tools, talks, and resources. So until then, if you've enjoyed this episode, please subscribe, review, and provide your comments so we can keep this going. And as always, remember, you can't pour from an empty cup. Keep doing the inner work, and I'll see you here next time. I hope you enjoyed another episode of From Mrs. to Me, real life stories of real women and their journey of transformation after divorce. I'm Crissy Freeman, and if you like this episode, please drop a review in Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts. Do you have a story to share? Are you ready to inspire other women on their journey through divorce? If so, find me on Instagram at From Mrs. to Me. For more tools and resources on creating your path to transformation after divorce, follow my community on Facebook, From Mrs. to Me, Rediscovering You After Divorce.